Hello everyone. So looking at chapter 15, and we'll be talking about some things that we've already talked about in class, but this way it'll be here and it'll be posted. So when we look at the chapter, it's actually broken into four different categories or four major ideas. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this early Earth and origins of life and the Stanley Miller Harold Urey experiment. So this is something we're definitely going to focus on. This section, though, we're probably not going to spend a lot of time on. So this talks about the different periods, the different eras, and kind of like how we moved from the sea to land, when plants first showed up, that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit more history, and I'm not really concerned about that. But we will kind of need to have a general understanding of that, because when we talk about mechanisms of macroevolution, so how evolution occurs on a larger scale. So in chapters 13 and 14, we talked about microevolution, where we talked about genes and the changes in gene pools and allele frequencies. So now we're looking at how that affects whole groupings of organisms. So that's why this last section there on the phylogeny and making phylogenetic trees is going to be kind of important to us as well. For this section, though, we're probably just going to, I'm not going to talk a lot about the notes. Instead, you guys are going to be doing the activity where you create your phylogenetic trees. So looking at the vocab for the chapter, I also made some changes here. You'll notice not all of the words are words that technically really have anything to do with actual evolution. We have some things on here: organic molecules, amino acids, nitrogenous bases, nucleic acids, RNA, polymers. Those are words that are used in the chapter, but because we haven't covered cellular biology yet, we're doing evolution first, we're going to need to have a general understanding of what those terms mean. So when we look at them and talk about them, so I mentioned this in class a little bit, but just to kind of reiterate that, so abiotic factors refer to non-living things. Organic molecules are ones that contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in some type of combination or ratio, and they are molecules that are going to be suitable and necessary for living things. When we get to talking about the Miller-Urey experiment, we'll notice that their experiment concluded with the formation of amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks to make proteins, and proteins are an organic compound. Nitrogenous bases, kind of like amino acids, are a component, are a part that are necessary to make nucleic acids. And the two main nucleic acids are one that you're familiar with, which is DNA, and the other that you're probably not familiar with yet, RNA, which RNA is just sort of like in some smaller single-celled organisms, this is the form that their genetic information is stored in, okay? So also you'll notice that the words are grouped by color. So all of the words that are grouped in blue kind of relate to or deal with things associated with our first major topic, which is origins of life and how did life begin on the planet. Then the terms in green, and you'll notice compared to the one that I handed out to you, I kind of switched. So I switched phylogeny and convergent evolution, so I could kind of put these in order here. You will see some of these green terms show up in the phylogeny section of the notes and of the book, but really I kind of put them together here because all of these have to deal with concepts of macroevolution. Okay, so I kind of put them all together here in green, and all of the ones in red are ones that deal specifically with making those phylogenetic trees, cladograms, and sort of organizing how we would group organisms. And then, as always, we have our little warm-up activities here. So the main thing that I wanted you to get out of this, and the whole thing moving forward, so our warm-up question number 1 is asking you to look at some of those vocab terms that we see for chapter 15 and try to associate them. Which of those words could you kind of make a point that they are relevant or have something to do or can be interrelated with allopatric speciation, and which terms might have something to do with sympatric speciation. So when you're looking at things like some of those green terms that deal with things like continental drift, so continental drift can create a geographic isolation or geographic barrier that would allow for allopatric speciation to occur. And then also when continents drift apart and organisms kind of get stranded on one area of a continent, and they start overlapping areas and start kind of developing within their population, it could also lead to sympatric speciation. So really that's what we're after, but in the slides you'll kind of notice that I put some important connection points in there where I want you to tie together some of the terms from 13 and 14 to what we're learning here in 15. Second question there, some factors that lead to mass extinctions. So as I said, for this section, which kind of deals with those different periods and eras, I don't expect you to necessarily know all the eras. What I want you to kind of get out of that is what are some of the things like the natural catastrophic events that could have led to mass extinctions, what a mass extinction is, and then also one of the more posing questions is, what is going on today? Are we in a mass extinction today by definition? So we'll talk about that when we get to those slides. Also here then, number 3, so the major components of Earth's early atmosphere, we'll see in the Stanley Miller Harold Urey experiment that they didn't quite get the gases right, but we have been able to kind of fix that and still make their experiment work based on what we now know were the gases that were present in Earth's early atmosphere. Lastly there, number 4, and this is something I highly encourage. In fact, I'm even considering asking it in some way, shape, or form. So you might have to do this on your quiz, where I might give you a set of terms and I might ask you to draw a concept map that kind of shows that you understand them. So this, I think, number 4 is one of the best ways for you to actually study the material and make sure you understand how the terms are interrelated. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Earth's early history. As you can see, I have a couple different images pulled up here. And this one, they're all kind of showing you, so you see the lightning, you see volcanic eruptions, very chaotic, very kind of fluid moving. You see the asteroid and meteorite impacts, the atmosphere wasn't even really formed in this picture yet. And then there was a period after that where it kind of cooled down and things started to settle in. So that's what we sort of see over here on the right. So our major question is, where did life come from and how did it even begin? So we discussed this a little bit already. And we talked about the fact that evolution as a process is fact, but where and how life actually originated is kind of some speculation and still theory, and whichever kind of idea you want to kind of cling to is okay, because we don't necessarily, this is something we'll probably never really be able to prove. So, that's why it is our major problem to kind of, since it's got to be the starting point for evolution, it is the major problem for an evolutionary scientist to kind of prove, because really on the science side of things, we're saying that there was non-living inorganic material that somehow developed into organic material that somehow developed into life. So hopefully as we go through this, you can see how some of those things were actually possible. So the Earth was first formed about 4.6 billion years ago. It took until about 3.9 billion years ago for us to really develop conditions that were suitable for any type of life to even develop. So the early atmosphere contained things like hydrogen cyanide, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. And hydrogen cyanide is a poison. Carbon dioxide leads to global warming and those kinds of things. So you notice one thing is kind of missing from here. You do not really see oxygen listed. So our beginning atmosphere really didn't even contain oxygen. So organisms that use oxygen for energy aren't going to be developed and aren't going to evolve until much later on. So there's a couple different ideas. So if we're just thinking strictly about non-living material turning into living substances, one idea or theory is that the environments around deep sea vents where volcanic eruptions occur and there's hydrothermal vents and things like that, that those might have provided the right ingredients to cause the correct kind of chemical reactions for inorganic substances like the metals and things like that that make up the Earth's crust to combine with the water, to combine with the gases and things like that to create some organic materials. The other idea is that those organic materials didn't originate on this planet, that they came to us through all the meteorites and asteroids and things that bombarded our planet before the Earth had an atmosphere. Okay, so in fact, there's one theory that goes so far, you can see in parentheses there, that goes so far as to say, and we do have some evidence, they found meteorites that contain what they believe are fossils of prokaryotic organisms like bacteria. So one idea is that not just organic materials, but some life itself, some of those like single-celled organisms that would have been the start of life on this planet may have actually come to us through those asteroid and meteorite impacts. So in order for all that to happen, we actually need there to be organic molecules. So again, if you look at your vocab sheet, so I didn't say this earlier, but it might be a good idea if you have the vocab sheet out with you so you can kind of reference it as we go through some of these things. So the term organic materials is on there, organic molecules. So remember what I said on that slide, that those are things that contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They tend to contain some other things as well, but those are the three main things it has to have. And typically we say as long as it has carbon, but there are some things that have carbon in them that are not themselves organic. So, but we needed that in order to prove that life could come, because all living things on this planet are carbon-based life forms. So let's look at the early conditions. So there were these two scientists in the early 1900s that wanted to kind of test how could organic materials come from inorganic substances. So I always picture like the mad scientist kind of like experiment here with test tubes and things heating up and zapping it and everything like that. So they took this flask, they filled it with what they thought were the gases that made up Earth's early atmosphere. So you can see there hydrogen, methane, which is carbon and hydrogen together, ammonia, and water. And they basically made sure there were no living things in these beakers and flasks and stuff they were using, so it was all completely sterile. And to kind of simulate the stormy, chaotic, the meteor impacts, the lightning and thunderstorms, and all the chaos that was going on the planet, they used electricity to kind of simulate lightning. And when they zapped those gases in their little setup, they ended up getting amino acids. And as I said before, amino acids are things, they're the building blocks, they're the small units that make up proteins, and proteins are one of our organic compounds. So it kind of proved that we could get organic substances from a bunch of inorganic stuff. Now, we do know that those aren't the actual gases that were there, but we've done this experiment over again using what we know were the gases of Earth's early atmosphere, and we've still been able to get the same results. Okay, in fact, we can get results that are so good we could actually make specific amino acids using this experiment by tweaking which gases and how much of those gases we put in. So our next step then was we were going to have to see, like, we needed some type of cells. So there's two different terms. Your book uses the term protocell. Other books will use the term microspheres. So this image over here is an image of a protocell. So basically it is a bunch of lipids, which are fats. So think about if you pour oil into water and it kind of forms little bubbles. So that's kind of what this is. Lipids are fats, so it's like an oil, and it forms these little bubbles. And those bubbles basically provided protection for things that ended up inside of them. So these little squiggly things that you see inside are something that we call ribozyme. So it's sort of a form of an organic substance that can carry genetic information. So you can see we have the basic makings of a cell.